Right, I think we will dive in. Roya, I'm turning it over to you. What a terrific job you've done on this event. And I look forward to the discussion with Professor Wu and Qian Julie.
Hey, I have the spotlight right now. So good evening, everyone. I hope everyone's doing well and staying healthy. Thank you for sparing the time to attend this awesome event with Qian Julie Wang. My name is Roya Burns. I am the co-chair for the Asian Pacific American Law Students Association, APASA, at Northeastern Law. I am so excited to introduce Qian Julie Wang, an author, speaker, and litigator to our broad NewSoul community. Qian Julie Wang is a graduate of Yale Law School, where she co-led APASA. She clerked on the Alaska Supreme Court and the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals. After big law firm practice for several years, she is now a managing partner at Gottlieb and Wang, a boutique New York law firm dedicated to advocating for rights of special needs children, people of color, and immigrants. Qian Julie was born in Shijiazhuang, China. At age 7, she moved to Brooklyn, New York with her parents. For several years, they lived in the shadows of undocumented life in New York City. Her first book, Beautiful Country, will be published on September 7th this year. It's a powerful literary memoir that follows a family through those years as they grappled with poverty, manual labor in sweatshops, lack of access to medical care, and the perpetual threat of deportation. Qian Julie's short pieces have been appeared in major publications, including the New York Times and the Washington Post. Most recently, she published an op-ed in the New York Times titled "Anti-Asian Racism Isn't New." This event is hosted by APASA at NewSoul in collaboration with NewSoul's Office of Development and Alumni Relations, Black Law Students Association, Latin American Law Students Association, Middle Eastern South Asian Law Students Association, Multicultural Law Students Association. We would love to express our gratitude to all of them, as well as other students associations who have helped promote this important event, including the Women's Law Caucus and the Students Bar Association at NewSoul. Special thanks to Miao Mikus, Northeastern Director of External Relations, Professor Margaret Y.K and Professor Margaret Wu, who devoted time to plan this event. Now we will start tonight's event with an exclusive reading of an excerpt of Qian Julie's upcoming book, followed by a moderated discussion between Qian Julie and Professor Wu. We probably will leave 10 to 15 minutes at the end of for open discussion with our broad community audience. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Roya. Thank you everyone for being here with me today on a beautiful spring day. You could have been outside, but you're inside with me, and I do appreciate that. I want to say a particular thank you to Miel for planning this wonderful event, Roya for pulling it all together, Professors Wu and Han DuPont for putting so much time in, and the entire NewSoul community, as well as the student organizations that have sponsored this. I'm just truly honored. When deciding which passage to share today, I was really torn. I initially was going to share a passage about the street harassment that my parents and I had experienced very early on in our time in the US in the 90s. But then I thought about the Atlanta shooting, and I thought about how all of us are so aware of what's been happening to the Asian American communities recently, perhaps belatedly aware, but aware nonetheless. But we know less about what the day-to-day lives of the Atlanta victims were. And I chose this passage to show just a little bit of insight of what it's like to work as a Chinese immigrant new to the US, and the emotional toll that it might take, coupled with all of the harassment that we already have been learning about. Wading through the viscous August heat, Mama and I made our way to the warehouse-like building on Division Street, across from a red brick structure that Mama told me was an elementary school. We climbed 3 flights of stairs and were rewarded with a gym-sized room. Red and black cloth covered the 2 windows, the only source of natural light. recalling to me the calligraphy strips on the thresholds of the Wang courtyard. In that room, there was no day or night. There was only work. The air was infused with steamed rice and salty sweat. Overhead, fans whirred, their blackened, rusted blades playing tag with swarms of flies. Visible from the door were rows upon rows of sewing machines, each with its own hunchback guarding the post. The hunchbacks moved minimally, as if each movement caused blood to drain from their wrists. Most of the hunchbacks were women, though a scattered few were men, and here and there was a little girl around my age. The curved backs of the people reminded me of freshly steamed mantou in different flavors. Here, one clothed in white, plain flavor. There, a purple one, taro maybe. You sit here, I barely made out from the Cantonese, emerging from a lady whose skin reminded me of a dumpling wrapper pulled taut against too much filling. She planted me in front of a stool at the edge of a planked wooden table. You sit there, she commanded Mama, directing her to a sewing machine to my left. Before us stood mountains of cloth in two large canvas carts. In a basket on the table, a molehill of small white labels. Mama grabbed a handful of cloth. They were shirts I saw up close, and set them on her left. And then I watched as Mama turned into a hunchback, taking a label and placing it on the seam of a shirt by the neck. She pressed down on the pedal under the machine, which whirred awake and spat out black thread. After Mama finished attaching a label onto an article of clothing, she tossed it into an empty cart behind us. I had my own mountain and my own cart. I had my own job too, to cut all the loose strings dangling off the seams. I had my own pair of scissors with a black handle and long metal blades. My right hand and wrist could barely support their weight. I had to put the scissors down after every other piece and shake my hand out. I tried to use it with my left hand once, but found that it was too heavy for that hand to use at all. In Zhongguo, I had a pair of bright orange plastic scissors. They were blunt with rounded tips, designed to pretend cut things that were already cut. Back then, I wished for real scissors like the ones Baba used to cut his papers into strips, which he would then rip into smaller pieces. So I was happy when I got to Meiguo and received my very own pair at the sweatshop. Before he left Zhongguo, Baba warned me never to run with scissors, which of course prompted me to grab the pair from his desk and run circles around our apartment. I had made only 3 laps when I tripped on my own train set, causing the scissors to bite a long, angry gash into my left palm. 你看看, Baba chided, but his voice was gauze, not mad at all. After Baba left Zhongguo, there was no one to tell me not to run with scissors, so I stopped doing it because it was no longer fun. On the anniversary of the day Baba left, I took his scissors, rusty from abandonment, and snipped at our leather couch. The cuts made 2 wings with a dip in the middle, like a TV show had taught me. The TV show had also taught me to snip only paper. When Mama walked into the living room, she yelled at me, not about running with scissors this time, but about using them. Qian, what is this? I thought it was obvious, but sometimes you had to explain things to Daren, the adults. They were too big to see the important things. They are swallows, Mama. The TV taught me. She blinked at me, and this told me I had to be patient and explain some more. Sometimes Daren were a little slow. They will fly to Baba in Meiguo to make sure he's not lonely. Mama walked out of the room, but I heard her sob in the kitchen.
Terrific. Thank you so much. You know, I want to just start off by thanking you for writing this book, for speaking out, and of course for coming to Northeastern and sharing your experience with us. I also had the privilege of reading an additional other pages, but what I could sense throughout all the passages is the sense of fear and vulnerability and longing, right? That's expressed. And so I guess I might just start off the conversation with asking you, what was your image of America? What did your parents tell you, and what did you, how did you deal with all that vulnerability when you got here?
I think it's interesting to think about our childhood experiences. I think all of us can remember the first time we went to a friend's house and realized that things weren't exactly the same as they were in our house. Like we all assume that our experiences as kids are universal. So when I came here, I assumed that my experience of America was identical to everyone. So I assumed that America was poor. Everyone was poor everywhere. Everyone was afraid of being caught. All of us were in hiding. All of us worked in a sweatshop or a sushi factory. Um, and it's interesting you asked me what I expected coming in. And back then in the 90s, there was just not much information in China about the US. There's a passage earlier in the book where one uncle says, oh, the roads are paved with gold. And the other uncle says they starve people and shoot people on the street. And so we had really no idea of what to expect. My father, as you could tell from that passage, arrived in New York 2 years before my mom and I did. So he gave some limited information that he was working at a laundromat, that he was working at kind of a mental institution to take care of special needs children and people convicted of crimes but then deemed insane, so that they need people to take care of them. So my image of America was basically what he told me, and I simply assumed that everyone lived that life. And it does help a little bit, right? As a kid, if you don't feel deprived, because you're like, well, every American kid is hungry. Every American kid goes to school starving. And how I dealt with that is, I guess, how a lot of humans learn to deal with things, like by putting on armor, by putting on shields so you're not so vulnerable. So what does that mean? Everything I did in school had to be absolutely perfect because I had to figure out a way to get us out of that situation. The longer I stayed, the older I got, I saw that there were rich people out there and there was money. And so in my mind, money was what made difference. You make a lot of money and then you have fewer problems, which is partly true, partly not true. Over preparing, overcompensating, living in a survival mode, being on the street and just monitoring your environments at all times in case if there is a cop, you will notice him the minute he steps onto this block. That kind of mentality. And then there's also invisibility, right? Like keeping your head down, not making too much of a fuss. So much of the messaging that we in the AAPI community got from our parents who had generational trauma. And there was a real feeling of a need to protect my parents. My mother didn't speak English. I learned much faster than she did. And I think maybe many immigrant children and people in the AAPI community can probably relate to seeing their parents bullied or made fun of because they don't speak English or they don't understand how things work. And that kind of pain is a very, very special kind of pain when the person who's supposed to protect you is being harmed. You learn to be a fighter and you learn to kind of build that armor around you and the people that you love most.
Yeah, it is amazing because I too come from an immigrant family, and it's amazing once we get here, our roles are reversed oftentimes, and it's a tough position to take as a 7-year-old. And I guess I asked that question earlier because today now we have so many undocumented children at the border in Texas. And I often, every time I hear the news, I think to myself, what must be going through their minds? What experience are they taking and how are they going to handle their experience in the US? I don't know if you have any thoughts about that, any advice you would give?
Yeah. I think just looking back on how I experienced everything versus how my parents experienced everything coming here, they were professors in China. They were, part of the intellectual elite. And I was a kid who went from being pretty wealthy to having nothing. And of course, they always said, we were something back in China, now we're nothing. But for a kid, you're so in your immediate world, of course, I miss my toys and my friends and my family. Of course, that longing was there, but you kind of just are better able to take it as it comes and just roll with whatever comes. That's the resilience and special nature of kids, right? They can just kind of take whatever comes and go with it. But I mean, I've never been through anything as horrific as being an unaccompanied minor in detention. I can only imagine what those children are going through. But I will say what got me through very difficult years was my mom telling me, this is temporary. This is temporary. It's not going to be forever. It's so easy to believe that your current situation is going to be forever. You will make it out, and you will be a light for everyone else. So her believing in me, her reminding me that over and over and over again really got me through. The other thing I wish she had told me, but she didn't, and I think it's because she felt so much fault of her own, is that it's not your fault. Because children, all of us take on a lot. We all blame ourselves, but children often think whatever happens to their parents, whatever happens to them is their fault. It's not your fault. It systemic barriers that children are too small to understand. But yeah, those two advice, I mean, however meager, hopefully will get children out of that psychological trauma.
Yeah. So I mean, and again, because your experience is so rich, what would you say to those people who says, they shouldn't come anyways because they're undocumented. They should come legally. And what would be your response?
I have a multi-pronged response, as we like to say in court. First, what do you mean by come in legally, right? For the better part of the past decade, most of the undocumented population in the US came here on legal visas, got stuck and had to overstay. Is that more legal than someone who comes here on unauthorized status, but then gets asylum? And then if you think about, what laws are supposed to do, laws are supposed to reflect the mores and morals of our world. Laws are not a fixed thing. And certainly in this legal community, we should be challenged to think about not just what is currently legal, but what should be legal. And looking back on our country's founding, did Christopher Columbus get a visa from the indigenous embassy? Was he legal? And if he wasn't legal, then all of us can trace our roots back to an illegal, background.
That's terrific. I'm gonna have to jot notes and share that same same answer. So what I mean the and by the way, your book is called, in case we haven't said it, I want to make sure we give a plug to it. It's called Beautiful Country, which is the Chinese characters for America, right? Yeah. And a memoir of an undocumented childhood. It's out this September by Penguin Press, and I think you can pre-order it.
Actually, but Penguin Random House, Doubleday.
Okay, Penguin. Yeah. Okay, Doubleday, and you could pre-order it at this point on Amazon. So finally, before we move on to the anti-Asian, because you've also been quite an activist and speaking out on those issues. So final question about the book too, and that is, is there a particular message that or messages that you want readers to take from your book?
What I try to do with this book is not to be political about it. I find that you make the most connections and pathways in changing people's minds when you can reach their hearts. And what this book aims to do is put the reader in the shoes of an undocumented child and kind of see things through her eyes and experience things kind of semi firsthand. And I guess the main takeaway, ideally, from reading this would be the very human experience of being uprooted, being told that repeatedly that you're illegal, being told that you can't go to a doctor when your mom is very ill, being told that no matter what you do, you can't shed the status that you have no understanding of how you got in the first place. But there's also a lot of hope and love and resilience there. I think it's very important for us to recognize, as we said, that the incredible resilience of not just children, but of immigrants, of humans. We can really overcome a lot, and that includes ignorance. We can overcome it if we're willing to talk about it and think about it and be confronted with some very uncomfortable realities.
At what point did you find your voice? Could I ask? I know this wasn't in my list of questions, but it did occur to me as I'm thinking it, because it's a childhood that would have beaten people down, really.
Yeah, and I felt beaten down for a long time. I pretended I was never undocumented. I pretended I was born here. I've gone through, all iterations of lies to kind of cover up the shame. And that's really what it is, right? Like so much of our personalities and our weak points or our sore spots come from the shame of something that happened to us early in life. And if we can embrace that, then that gives us power to be who we have always been able to be. But I found my voice, and I think all of us maybe can relate in the AAPI community, parents telling us not to make waves, not to be so loud, not to cause trouble, just get along and you'll move along in life. But being a litigator, I was constantly the only woman, the only person of color, usually both, in a room, in a conference room, in a courtroom, anywhere. And my job was to speak up for my clients, right? Like I couldn't keep my head down. That was my job. It was so much easier for me to learn to do that through a client, because I believed in these cases. I believed in these arguments. It was easy for me to do that. But the more I did it, the more I looked at my own life and I was like, why am I not standing up and saying, these immigration policies are messed up. This is what happened to me because of the policy. These are real human lives at stake. If I can say that for a client, if I can tell a client, no, you have a right to be here, you have a right to say this, you have a claim, why can't I say it to myself? So it was being a litigator, I think, really saved me because it gave me all the skills that I had buried deep down to just try to, make it forward in life.
You're absolutely right, because I don't know if it's limited to being a litigator, but I have found that being in law and really representation, the idea that you are representing somebody's interests, gave me also the power and the voice too. Whereas I think still today I have a hard time necessarily speaking on behalf of my own interests, but it's a first step. So maybe everybody or every AP I should go to law school for at least 1 year, maybe. So let me just turn also to the recent rash of anti-Asian violence. Obviously the Atlanta shooting really touched you deeply too. Where were you when it happened, and what went through your mind?
I was at home, as I've been for the past 14 months, on my couch. Actually, my husband saw the headline first and he read it out to me. And my first thought, and then I immediately got on my phone and looked at the coverage. And my first thought was, everyone seemed to be taking it for granted that these massage parlors are sexual in nature. And that wasn't for granted for me. Like, there are a lot of Asian massage places that are not sexual. And is it because it's of the tie to Asian women? And then I thought, why is there so much coverage of this guy, and why is this photo everywhere? I want to find out,
the women,
the victims.
Yeah.
Not the victims. I don't need to hear that he had a bad day. I was incredibly upset. And then my thoughts went to the things I had witnessed as a kid. And I wrote about this on social media the next day. Like, so early, probably in my first year here, I was walking to school and 2 adult white men pulled me aside on the sidewalk and said, first of all, where in Asia are you from? And I was like, China. And then they were like, how old are you? We've been watching you and taking bets. And as a kid, you're just like, okay, can I leave now? But I think I go back to that moment so many times when, as a teenager, as someone who's still wrestling with how women are treated in the world, men feel so entitled, and white men feel so entitled to Asian bodies. And I thought about my mom working at a hair salon and how she would come back and said she felt like it was prostitution because men would come in and she would be giving them a haircut and they just grab her. And they felt okay doing that. But there's just so much entitlement to our beings. Meanwhile, we're supposed to be silent and we're supposed to be submissive, and of course, some of us are undocumented, so we actually can't speak up. So it was just I mean, it was an awful week, and I'm sure that all of us can relate to experiences like that it recalled for us. But after all of that processing, I was in a way at least glad, and not that it came about this way, but I was glad that there was more conversation about it, more discussion. These were things that we had all experienced on our own in silence and felt ashamed about. Like, I felt there was something wrong with me that those men pulled me aside when I was a kid. I felt there was something wrong with me when men stalked me on the subway or exposed themselves. It was my fault. I shouldn't have been asking for that. No, now all of the voices are coming together. It's not our fault. It's how this country is built. It's white supremacy. It's how men and all of us really are conditioned by media and the portrayals of Asians and Asian women in media.
But there's still, you know, it's amazing. I still think that there is a lack of conversation about that, though. I mean, I even in spite of a consistent, persistent pointing out by the AAPI community, they still, it's really the press is still talking about it either as a race matter or a sex matter, rather than as an intersectionality of the two.
And of class as well.
And of class, exactly. And that these women were really themselves victims of a particular economic structure, and they had to do the jobs they had to do, and never a conversation about that. So how do you think we could, what more do you think we could do?
I mean, so much more, right? Like, you're right. The fact that I was heartened by this limited discussion in the mainstream suggests how quiet things were before. It's not that members of the AAPI community were necessarily quiet. No one was picking up our stories or featuring them. So I think awareness, discussion is number one. Reforming how Hollywood, TV, movies, I mean, so much of what's new movies now still contain these harmful stereotypes, and people think it's okay. You know, it's just a passing joke at the water cooler. It's just a throwaway line in a Hollywood film. No, it's not, because it builds up to this somehow happening, this being okay. This, you know, spate of crimes has been happening for a very long, I mean, for a year before people really started talking about it. And I think there's a lot of work to be done across the racial groups. White supremacy has so long pitted AAPI members against BIPOC, Black individuals, Indigenous. We can't speak up for our rights without being anti-Black for some reason. That only serves one purpose, white supremacy, right? I think there are a lot of inroads to be made with BLM and other organizations like that, because I think there are issues between our communities, right? There's racism against Black individuals in the Asian community. There's certainly the other way around as well. And I think a lot of that may be shaped by what we're told by the white man upstairs, right? Like, how much do we actually get to talk to each other directly, and how much is funneled through media and Hollywood, right? And how things are spun. So I think galvanizing that grassroots community-driven conversation alliance is really important. Of course, it's going to take time. I just don't think, I've read a lot about, you know, people saying policing is the way to go, and I just don't see that working, having been undocumented. Every time I saw a cop, I turned the other way. If they had heavily policed the massage parlors, a lot of these women probably wouldn't have gone to work. They would have had to find another way to make a living. Right? It's just not, and until the police work for all of us, none of us.
That's the question. I mean, that's where we have to, because you don't necessarily want these women to be left unprotected either. So how do we find that? Yeah.
But until the police work for all of us, we cannot trust them to work for each of us. It's just not gonna, there's no trust there. Yeah,
no, it is, you know, it's you raise a really terrific point about the kind of the need to build coalition, right? That in fact, what a lot could be done between different racial groups, because at this point, and most very often Asian Americans are used as a racial wedge to kind of to build kind of divisions within solidarity. And so we need to do more work on that. But even apart from that, though, too, do you think that the Asian American experience is different, though, and that the kind of racism we face is different?
Yeah. It reminds me of litigating discrimination cases and saying, usually it's a bunch of little things that makes the person feel incredibly uncomfortable, but there's nothing that we can quote as the smoking gun in a press blast. Sometimes we get really lucky and people say really stupid things and we got them, right? I think being Asian is the former. You got a lot of really uncomfortable situations that make you just uncomfortable in your skin, uncomfortable to walk down the street. But there's no one thing that's like, no, this person is racist. It's just like, this person cut me off when I was talking, and this person asked me to bring them tea for some reason, and all these little microaggressions that make it hard to draw the picture of what's the real feeling. What I have been emboldened by has been the Me Too movement, how white women have come forward and described kind of these experiences. And when I see that, I'm like, oh, I experienced that, but also in this way in which, I was assumed to be submissive. I guess it is a problem. I thought I was just being too sensitive, right? Like we're so often told we're too sensitive. What do you have? What else do you want? You have it so much better. You're not being shot by cops, right? Like, stop asking for so much.
Not yet. I mean, there have been instances actually.
And so I think there's a large part of our experience that's silenced and it's forgotten. I mean, the lynching of the Chinese immigrants in LA back in the 1800s, Vincent Chin, who was brutally murdered in Detroit. A lot of things at the internment camps doesn't get talked about, and a lot of it, I think, is this wedge that you have astutely identified, and some of it is from our own community of being with generational trauma. You are in survivor mode, and I have been in survivor mode for so long. And now it's time for us, I think, in this generation to understand that, like, we have the right to thrive, not just survive. We have the right to,
I love that. Yeah.
Present and not just exist.
Yep.
So that, I think, is where we're going. And I'm just heartened, and things it will take a long time. We'll probably get forgotten again, and it'll be a resurgence, come back. But I'm just glad to be witnessing this, because in my personal history, I have not seen the community this vocal.
That's great. Yeah, I Mia also put in the chat, I love that, the right to thrive, not just survive. I think that could be our war cry, perhaps. I just have one or two more questions. I know that our time is getting, and I see some questions in the chat already, so I like to open it up and get and broaden the conversation. So do you have any, since you're speaking for law students, one of the questions in the chat actually relates to is, do you have any advice for law students of minority background who faces bias and microaggression?
Yeah, I had a great mentor who was a straight white man, but my first year of practice, he pulled me aside and he said, you have drive, you have everything it takes. One piece of advice I'm going to give you, totally unsolicited, so don't take it if you don't believe in it, but he said, just remember that this firm does not care about you. You're going to give up your time with family. You're going to give up yourself. You're going to give up your health. But the minute this firm sees fit to fire you, it will. This is a profit-making entity.
Yeah,
people
exactly.
in the firm might care about you, but the firm does not. And that's something that I probably could have applied better and more early on, but I've seen it unfold, right, over time. And I had this belief that I could outwork my skin color. I could outwork my gender. I could outwork my immigrant past. And this is not to dissuade anyone, but just know, if you're an Asian presenting person, people will see you in a room and think you're not a threat. That is sometimes helpful information. Like, I have played, quiet until I got into the courtroom and really let loose. That could be helpful, right? Like if we're going to have to live in this structure, let's learn to use it for us until we can overthrow it. And that's what I would encourage people to consider. There's a great op-ed in the New York Times today about a woman who was at Google, and she said, Google was a great place until I filed an HR complaint, and Google immediate reaction was to protect itself. And that's what any entity is going to do. And I think as immigrants, we're just so ready to give all of ourselves and just prove ourselves. And the company is simply a numbers concerned entity.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, we really do have to protect ourselves too. So final question, are you optimistic about the future?
Yes, I am. And I had, funny enough, I had an experience before this presentation that may not seem like an optimistic experience, but it actually was. So I went to grab sushi at my local restaurant, and I was waiting aside because the waitress had to go pick up my order. It wasn't ready yet. And I was just on my phone, kind of standing out to the side, and a white teenager comes in and she's like, "Table for 4, please." And this is probably happened to many of us many times. It's happened to me all the time. So I just didn't even look up from my phone. I'm like, I don't work here. What was different
So
this
it was
time?
said to you, I see.
What was different this time was this teenager was so embarrassed. She was like, oh my God. She was so embarrassed. She ran out of the restaurant. Now, I don't want to shame anyone because that's not good, but that is a different response than what I have traditionally gotten, which is people being defensive. Like, oh, you're wearing like a waitress outfit, or you look like, you know, you work here, or just push past you to get to the waitress, right? Like this 16, 17-year-old told me that something was shifting in the dialogue at school, that she knew that this was a bad thing to be treating, just assuming an Asian person was a service professional. That gives me a lot of hope that the dialogue is shifting. And I want to say I was raised by very idealistic parents. So my in-laws actually wrote my parents after the Atlanta shooting, and my dad, I just want to quote him because he's the biggest patriot I have ever met. He loves America, believes in it wholeheartedly. And he said, after decades of living here, our hopes and dreams of a better future never die, despite the very traumatic and senseless experiences of racism. We came here because we believed that this great country promised us a better life and better opportunities. And I have steadfast and unshakable faith in America.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Qian Julie. Let's open it up now for questions. And you could either raise your hand with the reaction kind of little toggle, or put your question in the chat. I'm looking through here and I do see Mark Gottlieb has, let me see here, a question for Qian. Mark, do you want to just ask her yourself?
No, I'm okay.
Oh, okay. Well, here. Now, how would you pitch your book to defensive or non-curious white men, and what would you hope they might learn from reading it?
I would not pitch it on any political axis. I would say, do you remember the first time in your childhood where you felt like the uncool kid who was just going along with it, what everyone else was doing, not really knowing what you were mimicking? Do you remember the first time you lied to your parents? And hopefully get at that kind of childhood nugget and core, because I think if you distill it down and boil all of us down, we are those vulnerable children who are curious and open to the world. And we've built, as I said, armors around ourselves to protect that core.
That's great. Let me see here. Anybody else?
Yeah, Margaret, I have a question.
Good. Yeah.
Qian, you and Margaret were speaking earlier about the need to create coalitions, and some I've seen been really heartened by the Asian and Black coalition that we've seen at some of the Stop Asian Violence, Racism. I'm sorry, protests. But my question to you has to do actually with the affirmative action cases that are coming out, one against Yale, previous one against Harvard, which actually has pitted some Asian parents, Asian students, and others, from other Black and Brown communities. And I was just wondering what your thoughts about that.
We've been used on so many of these types of cases. The white parents are not really fighting, right, for the Asian parents in those cases. Asian parents' right to have their kids accepted to Harvard or Yale or Princeton. And I think that for an Asian student, the more people of color there are in a school, the more comfortable that experience has been. Because speaking as someone who went to Yale all completely unprepared, I felt like I did not belong. I experienced a lot of microaggressions. I went into a classroom full of white guys saying, "Oh, look at all these weird Asian names in our class," and they were making fun of those sounds. Do any of us want that? No, right? We want a multitude of perspective and experiences, because then all of us feel equally, like, because just because I'm Asian and you're Asian doesn't mean that we have the same experiences, right? The more voices and different voices we have, the better education a young person has. And the white parents who understand that, and they're not fighting this. But I think that once again, it's just a way, I'm going to grab the closest minority. And so this way they can't say that I'm racist. But really, that's exactly what's going on.
Thank you. I see here.
Yeah, go ahead. Oh, I see a question from John. Do you have any advice for law students with minority backgrounds?
Oh, I asked that. Yeah.
Oh, you did.
Well, how about Claire?
Yeah. Okay.
How about Claire? Does Claire want? Claire says, how do you give yourself space as you continue to fight for others, for yourself and others? How do you find that balance?
Well, my husband will tell you it's exhausting. There are certainly more days when I feel completely ineffectual because I just see so many things to do and not enough time to do it all. And it's important for me to remind myself, important for me to remind people I'm working alongside, that, as has often been quoted, the arc of justice is long as you're making the little minute movements in the right direction, you are contributing to that larger wave of movement, because you are one person, but you affect everyone around you. And if each person thinks about it that way, then we have a whole world connected. And so you do what you can every day, and you take a rest when you need to, and not feeling guilty about it is something that I'm still working on. Feeling selfish about it, but you got to take care of yourself too. So
that's absolutely true. And certainly finding support with each other is also another terrific way. There's, by the way, I want to kind of highlight a book that came up several years ago called Minor Feelings, that was written by, I think, is it Kathy Hong Park?
I actually was revisiting my notes. Before this. I love that book.
Yeah.
And actually, it brings up a good point. Reading her essays and her experience allow me to say, no, what I experienced was also wrong. And so I would tell the law students who are going into white-led law firms, if you see something happening that's wrong to someone else, you don't have to speak up in the whole room, right? Because that's a lot. And you can, if you want, for all the more power to you. But consider pulling that person aside and say, hey, what happened to you in that meeting was really wrong. It rubbed me the wrong way. And I think that something should be done about it, because that will give that person the power and at least the validation to say, I'm not imagining things. These things are happening, and I have a community around me who will support me. That kind of messaging from my colleagues, my classmates over the years, have really kept me sane, right? Because there's so much gaslighting and crazy making in this world that you don't know what to believe in. And it's very easy to internalize that kind of gaslighting.
Okay, let's see. I see one. I think we might have touched on this already, but I'll read it out loud again from Antonio Coronado. And he said, relatedly, what tips do you have for self-preservation for navigating the gaslighting and white supremacy of the legal profession? I don't know if you wanted to add any more. I could go to the next question, but
no, this is This is good. Don't fight every battle, right? Don't feel guilty if you just don't have it in you to fight every battle. You have been a person of color in your skin long enough to know which battles are worth fighting. And I've often felt like, oh, I didn't stand up that time. And does that mean I'm complicit? No, it's exhausting being plagued with this all the time. And you do have to make a living. You do have to pay off your loans, right? You do have to have some peace. And it's okay sometimes to say, I'm not going to go for this one, or I'm going to wait and bring it up later, or I'm just going to let it slide for now. That self-preservation aspect is crucial. I would also say there aren't many models for us, but think of yourself, picture yourself as the partner, as the owner of the firm, as the client they're chasing after. There are not many role models for us. So we end up defaulting to like, oh, I'm going to be a senior associate for the rest of my life. And that'll be great. I'll make lots of money and I'll be second chairing trials that are important. No, dare to go for the big thing that you've been told that you're too small to get. You have to start conceiving of it first in your mind, because at first, the first time you think of it, it'll seem ridiculous. Like you're just full of yourself and you're just, imagining things. The 10th, 20th time, it'll seem more plausible. There's so many things. This book emerged as a nugget in my mind where I was like, this is never going to happen. This is ridiculous. I think I can write a book. That's ridiculous. No one would be interested in an Asian story. No one would be interested in undocumented immigrant story. And here I am many, many years later, but here I am. And so it's just because we're getting that messaging from everyone around us that we are supposed to be kept small. I started asking at my firm for big arguments, for big clients. I'm like, let me go pitch this client. Let me go handle this meeting on my own. And routinely, they would respond with, you're getting a little too big for your britches. Like, who do you think you are? I'm like, I am acting like a white man, right? You can tell me no, it doesn't hurt me. I'll be in the same position I've always been in. But what I notice too is that they did start, they were resentful, but some of them did start treating me with more respect. And that goes to the root of our profession, which is that we're all advocates. Whether or not you're a litigator, you could be a deal maker, you're still an advocate. And if you can't advocate for yourself, you're never going to have that white managing partner say, I see her as partner material. If you're not there, backing yourself up.
That's a great answer. And I'm sitting here thinking, you're absolutely right. There are times when you have to step back. There are times when you have to step up. Do you know when? You do, I know.
Gut. I
Yeah.
have learned to trust my gut. And it's, I think for women, particularly hard. But my gut has the only thing that has been with me this whole journey. And it's just served me well. And if I listened to my gut and it didn't go the way I thought it would, it's always ended up okay, right? Like something else has come out of it. So I think that messaging, right? Like you have been an immigrant or person of color or woman all your life. You are the expert on what is the right thing to do. Asking someone else for advice can be, great if you want to just vent, right? But they don't necessarily know, because you also know how you would handle something. Someone else might raise it a different way. You know where you want to go in your career. Maybe you want to be at this firm for the rest of your life and you don't want to be, swearing at a managing partner. Maybe you want to leave the next day and you do want to do that. So you are the expert, and just believe in it. The sooner you believe in it, the further you will go.
Yeah, absolutely right. Doesn't mean you can't solicit information and advice, but it really, you have to trust your own judgment. I see a question here. Mia says, did you write the book to share your story, or is it to honor your parents, or also that it would change people's perceptions of undocumented immigrants, or both?
So this story has always been, I remember being 7 and thinking, I learned English at the library. like library books. I knew no English, and I went to the library after school, and I would read a bunch of books. Sweet Valley High was one of my favorites, Babysitter's Club, all full of, you know, white kids in suburbia, although Babysitter's Club was a little bit more diverse, but no one in the situation that I was in. And I was thinking, how great would it be, you know, to have a book out there like that, not just to know that someone else out there is going through this experience, but has gone through it and made it out the other side okay. How great would that be? And so I envisioned that as a kid, and I tried to write the story in college, but it was too close to the trauma. I didn't tell anyone had been undocumented, so I wrote it as a novel, and it just clearly didn't work. I was too young. So I was like, okay, I'm going to chuck this, and I'm just going to be a lawyer. I'll focus on being a lawyer and fighting for justice that way. But, you know, every year or so, the book would just come back and be like, I should really write this. And then Trump came into the national consciousness and started spewing a lot of verbiage about undocumented immigrants, about Chinese people, about Mexicans. And I coincidentally that year became a citizen, 22 years after I first stepped foot here. And I just felt so much privilege and so much power. Like, what could he do to me now? What could any of them do to me if I came out with this story? I clerked for a Ninth Circuit judge who was amazing. And she was the first person I told, you know, in a position of authority. And she was like, she tricked me. She was like, you just write the story. It doesn't have to go anywhere. No one can read it. You can just keep it for your children and grandchildren, because she knew that was the way for me to start writing it. And once I started writing it, I wouldn't be able to not share it. So yeah, I took it on in about 2017, kind of in fits and starts. There were times where I was like, this book is never going to happen. Right. But then in October 2019, I said, you have 2 months to finish this book. And if you don't finish it, you're just forget about it and just keep doing this law thing. And sure enough, I finished it. And it's funny because even after you do the thing that you've been told is impossible, I remember the day my book deal was announced, a white male partner called me, because we're all remoting, called me, and he was like, you know, you're never going to make money from that book. And I was like, who is this? Who's calling me? How did you know about this? What? Yeah, so I didn't really do it out of spite, right? Like, but it seems to kick up some feelings in people. I just really wanted to humanize this experience and humanize undocumented people who were being talked about as political pieces and pawns, and usually nothing more than that.
Mm-hmm. Do you have another book idea up your sleeve?
I'm working on a novel now, actually.
See?
Yeah, what happens to the American dream when you're at the top? We set in a law firm, so.
And then you're going to hear from all those partners. Here's another one. You previously mentioned sometimes playing stereotype in a workplace, but how do you balance playing to those ideas while also challenging them and being true to your authentic self?
So I don't want to say I like pretended to be submissive. I don't think anyone who meets me will say that I ever will come across convincingly.
Yeah, I could attest to that already. Yeah.
I don't think anyone who's like, seen my emails, like no one. But in my specific situation, it was opposing counsel who was a big name partner at a giant firm calling me up and treating me like his secretary. He was like, oh, so we have oral argument on this day. Can you send me a calendar invitation? I'm like, what? So in that situation, you have a choice, right? You can be like, no, you are racist. Stop doing that. You're racist and sexist. Or you can be like, okay, whatever, not pick that fight, which is what I went along with. And so he went into the courtroom expecting someone who would take that kind of treatment and not plan for, you know, some sort of comeuppance for him. And he brought his client, he brought his whole team of associates. And the minute I got up on that podium, it was very clear what kind of person I was, and that I remembered that phone call and had taken it. But I think that it's not playing up, and I would never suggest that you be inauthentic or act a part, because I don't think that's good for, you know, these stereotypes that we're trying to debunk. But it does go to picking your battles, like knowing when, you know, there's a bigger battle, the Battle of Waterloo down the line, maybe this small battle, I'll just let slide for now because I know that I'm going to have my win down there.
Speaking like a true litigator, I think, too. Okay, we have one more final question. I think we're at 7:30, but I think we should get this, and then we can end. It says, it's from Sarah. Thank you so much for sharing your story and your thoughts. I was wondering if you could share your thoughts about breaking down the rhetoric of deservedness that America has imposed on immigrant community. That is, yes, some are more deserving than others, or that you only can come in if you deserve it. So how do you break that rhetoric down?
This goes hand in hand with our criminal justice problem, right? Some people are deemed beyond reform. Our society just gives up on certain kinds of people. And for some reason, undocumented immigrants who are not educated, immigrants who are doing really a lot of the labor that we need as a society to function, are just not valued and written off because of a certain, you know, one-dimensional aspect. I think what America prizes it, or America's strong point, I would say, is its ability to have divergent rhetoric, disagreements very openly, in a way that, you know, you look at the UK and even places like Canada, which also deals with racism, but insists that it doesn't happen. At least in America, we have that diversity of voices, for better or for worse. But I think that that diversity becomes a polarization in the social media and internet age, where people are just into camps now. And at the end of the day, you know, I think a lot of the MAGA group, Make America Great Again group, feel like they don't deserve. They feel very threatened, right? Like they are, you know, white men who feel like in a few years, the majority of this country will be people of color, and they feel very threatened. So we need everyone to feel like they are humans and they are valued and they are an important part of this country, our community, without this label of merit and deserving and legal, illegal. You know, that's really what brings everyone together. And it's not just good for the Black community and the brown community and the Asian community. It's good for the white community as well, because we're seeing the backlash of people who don't feel deserving.
Okay. Well, thank you so much. We're at the end of our time, and I just could hardly wait to open up your book and immerse myself in your story. And so again, thank you for writing the book. Thank you for speaking up, and thank you for coming to Northeastern. I think this has been a great conversation.
Thank you so much for having me. I mean, this experience has made me think maybe I should have gone here instead of law school as you go to, but I will consider myself an adoptive member.
Yes, you are now. Absolutely.
Very honorary. Thank
Yes.
you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you all.